Shubat, and you can see him on YouTube, and you can go there and listen to him speak and get some background information about what he believes about the Antichrist being a Muslim. And we'll look more at this soon, not quite as soon as the next slide, but soon in the next coming weeks, when we discuss whether or not the Antichrist is a Jew or a Gentile. And if a Gentile, is he a Muslim? So we want to ask the question and want to be a Berean to check out Walid Shubat and say, okay, is he right? Is he right? Does what he says about the Antichrist match the Scriptures? And why is he saying this? And if you know a bit of his background, and I'll let you do a little bit of a Google about his background and things like that, so that'll give you a little bit of idea why he says what he says. Okay? But one thing is certain, and that's in Matthew chapter 24. So we're going to go through just a few things that are pretty well certain that we know from Scripture. Matthew chapter 24, verses 36 and verse 50. Matthew 24, verse 36. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. We do not know when Christ will return. So when people say, okay, the Antichrist has to be alive in the world today, we don't know when that will be. Satan doesn't know, because it says here, the angels of heaven. Well, you know, if you count as Satan as being one of the angels that can come before the throne of God, accusing the brethren day and night, he doesn't know. He doesn't know. He has to have a man ready at any moment. He can't wait until the rapture and say, oh, the rapture has come, so I need to get someone ready. So he will be preparing someone somewhere on this earth in case the rapture comes. All right? Down to verse 50. The Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he looketh not for him, and in an hour that he is not aware of. There are many Christians today who don't really look for the return of Christ. They don't really care, because they're having such a good life on earth. They don't care about the return of Christ when he comes. I mean, I know we're continually looking for his return, aren't we? So, you know, we're looking for his return. I've mentioned the story previously where we were at a Power Baptist church and we were in line for the young marrieds. Was it young marrieds? In line for food, and the people behind me says, oh, well, when we talked about the Lord's soon return way back then, 30 years ago, you know, people were saying, oh, I hope not. What? As a Christian, what would you say, I hope not? Well, because they wanted to see their children get married, they wanted to see their children grow up, they wanted to see their children get married and do all the things. Who cares? Who cares? No man knows when Christ will return. Turn over to chapter 25 and look at verse 15. And unto one he gave 5 talents, and to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability. And straightway he took his journey. We have been given talents. We need to use those talents until such time as Christ returns. We need to continue to use those talents. Over to Mark chapter 13. We need to check out, we need to be Bible students, we need to be ready for Christ's return. We don't know when he will return. We're not told. We need to be ready though. We need to be ready. You can't say, oh, I'll be ready in 5 years' time. I'll be a Bible student in 5 years' time. we need to be ready because he could come this very day. He could come this very moment. Mark chapter 13 down to verse 32. But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father. We find it hard, isn't it, when God is a Trinity, and to know that even the Son doesn't know. He's waiting for God the Father to say, now is the time, go. So Satan doesn't know when Christ will return, so he has to have a man ready at a moment's notice. At a moment's notice. Luke, Matthew, Mark, Luke, so keep on turning to the left. Chapter 12, verses 37. Luke chapter 12, verses 37 through to 40. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. And if he shall come in the second watch, or come in the third watch, and find them so, in other words, watching, as in 37, blessed are those servants. We are blessed. We don't know when he will return, but we need to be watching. Watching, watching. Look at the sign of the times. Watching, watching. We have no greater sign for us today as the nation of Israel. Okay? The nation of Israel. They've just celebrated their 70th anniversary as a nation, 1948 to 2018. 70 years. Blessed are those servants. Verse 39. And this know, that if the good man of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched, and not have suffered his house to be broken through. Be ye therefore ready also, for the Son of Man cometh at an hour when ye think not. When ye think not. So he's not going to come today. Boom. Boom. Why did you say I'm not going to come today? Sorry, Lord. In my pipsqueak sound. I'm sorry. So we don't know when the Lord is coming back. But the Bible clearly tells us we need to be watching. Watch and be ready, for the Lord may come today. Oh, you're no fun at all. You're just like my class sometimes. Watch and be ready. Oh, I give up. I didn't rehearse it. Okay. All right. The Sunday school kids should know that. All right. Let's then embark on the three aspects. Firstly, is he? And I've put up here: is the Antichrist a Jew? Is he a Jew? A Jew? I'm not saying goodbye, by the way, because that's French. That's not Jewish. All right. Will the Antichrist be a Jew? A Jew, or a Gentile? Okay. Now, there are three main arguments. So when you study this out and you go online and you read books and all sorts of things, that, man, it's been a real minefield. You have no idea the things that I've had to go through. And now I have to present it to you, right? Who would want to be pastor and have to do all this? It's hard work, I tell you. There are three main arguments for thinking that the Antichrist is a Jew. So there are people today who say that the Antichrist will be Jewish. All right? So that's where they're coming from. The Antichrist is Jewish. And they use three main arguments. Firstly, the prefix, they say, is anti, which means instead of Christ. Instead of Christ. So therefore, the Antichrist must be instead of Christ. He will replace Christ. And so Christ was a Jew. So therefore, this man will be a Jew. Okay? And for them it makes perfect sense that he would be a Jew. Because the one in place of Christ must be a Jew as Jesus was. Alright? Simple. And people say, yeah, that makes sense. So therefore, it must be true. Right? What do we say? Well, let's search the scriptures. Thank you, Rick. Alright? We've got to be Bereans. And we've got to check out whether that's so. Okay? However, the word anti can also mean against. So as opposed to Christ. And now we've got a contradiction here. We either have one that replaces Christ or one who is opposed to Christ. Now it can be a Jew or it can be a Gentile, can't it? All of a sudden it's just changed. It's just changed by looking at the definition of the anti or anti. So many believe that the Antichrist will be from, firstly, the tribe of Dan. Hence he will be a Jew. So you know that the nation of Israel has how many tribes, Eli? 12. Can you name them? No, neither can I actually. You're not the only one. I haven't memorised them. So some people say he's from the tribe of Dan. The early church father Irenaeus, 200 AD, promoted this view, that he is a Jew and he is particularly from the tribe of Dan. And this was reasonable to him because scripture seemed to indicate that the tribe had fallen from God's favour. The tribe of Dan. And we'll look at some scriptures in a moment. How that when he looked at scriptures, the tribe of Dan had fallen out of God's favour. Which might be true, but does that mean that the Antichrist is going to come from that tribe? Okay? And we'll see in a moment. So it was first of Israel's tribes to indulge in gross idolatry, and it is not mentioned in the list of tribes. It was initially, but now it isn't. So Dan's tribe was omitted because it was idolatrous on many occasions, and as a result was mostly wiped out. Let's go to Leviticus. So just a bit of background to this tribe. So one of the arguments is that the word anti or anti-Christ was to replace Christ, in the place of Christ. But anti can also mean against. Here we see the tribe in Leviticus chapter 24 and verse 11. And the Israelitish woman's son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed. And they brought him unto Moses, and his mother's name was Shelomith, the daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. So there was a tribe of Dan, but it was a sinful tribe. It was involved in idols, worshipping idols, idolatry. And this Israelitish woman's son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed. Turn over to Judges. Judges. Joshua, Judges. Oops. Click on. Chapter 18. Chapter 18, verse 1. In those days, There was no king in Israel. And in those days the tribe of the Danites, or the tribe of Dan, sought them an inheritance to dwell in. For unto that day all their inheritance had not fallen unto them among the tribes of Israel. So they didn't receive any inheritance. And because there was no king, they were looking for their inheritance. Where is my land? Okay, where's my parcel? Where's my parcel of land? Okay, and down to verse 30. And these went into Micah's house and fetched, 30, I need to turn the page. And the children of Dan set up the graven image. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were the priests of the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. So they were involved in worshipping idols. And they fell out of favour with God and were mostly wiped out. Let's go over to 1 Kings. All we're doing is just getting a little bit of background and why people think that he may be a Jew. 1 Kings, so 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12. Just see why people think that he could be a Jewish man, and if Jewish, from the tribe of Dan. Oh look, I just did it again. A Jewish man from the tribe of Dan. Dan? Okay, don't forget to share the joke that I was in the bank this morning and a lady said, "Can you help me check my balance?" So I pushed her over. 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 28 through 30. Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold and said unto them, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." Now let me stop there for a moment and just go backtrack a little. Who brought the people out of the land of Egypt? Was it the golden calves? No. But here's this king from the tribe of Dan, which is saying, "Hey, I've made 2 calves of gold." And placed them. One was placed in Bethel, and another one was placed in another town, I forget now. Oh, here it is. Put in Dan. So let's just continue on. So verse 28. Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold and said unto them, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem." It's too far for you to travel to Jerusalem. You know, it's funny, isn't it? It's too far to go to church, so don't go to church. It's too far to go. Let me just make a church at home, have home church. Or it's too far to go to church, I'll just go to any church. You know? It says, it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, small g, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. No, the golden calves, their gods didn't bring them up out of the land of Egypt. Sure, and they must have, even though that golden calf was destroyed and cast into the river and it was crushed into pieces, they still held on to that and kept it all the way through into the promised land. And here we are seeing them making 2 others. Verse 29. And he set the one in Bethel and the other he put in Dan. Verse 30. And this thing became a sin. And this thing became a sin. For the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. They came to worship the golden calf. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he heard the ruckus, and they were having a real party while they were worshipping the golden calf. It's evil. Evil. And this is one of the reasons why people believe that not only is he a Jew, but he will be from the tribe of Dan. Anti-God. Turn over to Revelation, chapter 7. Revelation chapter 7. And beginning at verse 5 down to verse 8. Okay, so count the tribes. Count the tribes. Of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Reuben were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Gad were sealed 12,000. So how many tribes have we got so far?
36.
Tribes.
3
36,000 people, men in particular. Verse 6. Of the tribe of Asher were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Nephilim were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Manasseh were sealed 12,000. So now we've got 6. Verse 7. Of the tribe of Simeon were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Issachar were sealed 12,000. It's another 3. 3 threes are 9. Plus 3 more. Verse 8 makes it 12. Of the tribe of Zebulun were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Joseph were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Benjamin were sealed 12,000. Who's the tribe of Dan? Ain't there. Ain't there. Tribe of Dan is not there. And so they believe that the Antichrist will come particularly from the tribe of Dan, because God has removed them. Removed them. So Dan became one of the 2 places where the northern kingdom worshipped the golden calf. We've just seen that in 1 Kings chapter 12. But that does not prove that the Antichrist is a Jew. Okay? That doesn't prove that he is a Jew. Doesn't prove that the Antichrist is a Jew. Just because the tribe of Dan has been removed doesn't prove that the Antichrist is a Jew. Yet Jerry Falwell continues to promote this view. Okay? So, AntiChrist, they say, in place of Christ, so therefore Christ was a Jew, so therefore the Antichrist is a Jew. Secondly, the tribe of Dan is missing, so therefore he is a Jew. So you're assuming that firstly he is going to be a Jew, and then you're saying that he's going to come from the tribe of Dan because the tribe of Dan is missing, because they were involved in idolatry. They had 2 golden calves, and one in Bethel and one in Dan. But none of that proves that the Antichrist is Jewish. Because we can say that anti means against. So like antibodies. Okay. Against. And Jerry Falwell continues to promote this view. Okay, he can promote this view, but we need to be Bereans. So they also say, okay, what about Daniel 11:37? What about Daniel 11:37? I'll just say that in a condescending voice. I'm sorry, I apologise. I shouldn't. Turn to Daniel 11:37. And they use this verse to say that this is, proof. Proof that he is Jewish. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of woman, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. There you go. Must be Jewish. Verse 37, the God of his fathers must be Jewish. Must be Jewish. And those who maintain that the Antichrist is a Jew believe that his rejection of the God of his fathers proves that he's a Jew. Proves it. Are we convinced so far? You're not convinced? Okay. Croydon's not convinced, so we have to continue to prove that it's true. Alright?
Well, but he's not from Dan.
He's not from Dan, but he could be from other tribes, couldn't he? Could be. Maybe. And he's ignored the God of his fathers. Notice that in verse 37, is it capital G or small g? Verse 37. Pardon? Capital. So if it's capital G, it's Jehovah, God, yeah. Our God. It's not just a small g. It doesn't say God of his fathers, and his fathers worshipped other gods, small g, but God of his fathers. So therefore he must be Jew. Right? I'm a Gentile, right? But could I be Jewish? I'm sort of just taking a little rabbit trail. Pardon? I could be a proselyte, eh? Proselyte. So that my father, he could be a proselyte, for example, and he could be worshipping Jehovah. So I've ignored the God of my fathers, or my father. Okay, it does make me a proselyte. So the meaning disappears that he will reject the religion of his fathers. So that leaves the only option that the Antichrist is a Gentile. Let's, before we leave this actually, we'll dig a little bit more. I've got a question though. Some have argued that the Jews are responsible for most of the world's problems. And if you've been watching YouTube and things like that, the Jewish people, the money people are all, seem to be Jewish. Right? Rockefellers and all those people, money people. And all the trouble in the world are because of the Jews. They conclude that the Antichrist must be a Jew because the Antichrist will cause problems for the world. However, the Antichrist will be a man of peace to a dysfunctional world in turmoil. Remember, he brokers peace. He's the man who comes with a bow but no arrows. So he's a man who brokers peace, or gets the world on side through peace, and he makes a peace treaty with the nation of Israel and the nations around him, a world that will be in turmoil because the rapture will have happened, and so he will be hailed a wonderful man, a charismatic man, a man for the season, like Jacinda Ardern, the mosque shootings on 15th March 2019. She's a lady for the season, a time, and her scarf that she wears. Okay? So they say that the Antichrist is a man for that season. It's you're still in Daniel? Just go back to chapter 7. Another argument that he is Jewish is verse 8 here. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots, and behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. So this little horn, the reference to little horn, Israel is a little country. So the Antichrist must be the little horn, which because it's a little country, and he will come up as this little horn, because Israel is a small nation. That proves that the Antichrist is Jewish. Oh, you've got to do a lot of juggling, don't you, to get through that one. Just because it says little horn doesn't mean to say it's Israel. This little horn is a reference to the Antichrist, but just because it's small initially does not mean that it indicates Israel as a small nation and hence the Antichrist must be Jewish. It's absurd. Okay? Just because it's a small horn, and so therefore the Antichrist, and Israel is a small country, so therefore the Antichrist must be Jewish. It's absurd. And it makes no sense. Makes no sense whatsoever. John chapter 5 verse 43. So they pluck verses out to prove their point of view. Instead of doing it the other way around, right? They're finding verses. They don't allow the verses to work out who the Antichrist is. They find verses. It's a bit like saying, oh, I want to drink as a Christian. Where can I find some verses that will allow me to drink alcohol? Oh, here's one. Jesus turned water into wine. There we go. Now where am I going? I'm going to John. I can't do two things at once. John chapter 5 verse 43. I've come in my Father's name, and ye receive me not. If another shall come in his own name, him ye shall receive. Ah, there you go. The Antichrist must be Jewish. No. I don't get that from that verse. All it says is that Jesus Christ is rejected because he comes in his Father's name. But if he comes in another name, they will accept him. Doesn't make him Jewish. Doesn't make him Jewish at all. It just means that he'll be received. And we'll see a little later some other, I think, pretty pertinent arguments against Jewish Antichrist. So the argument states that Jews will never receive anyone as a leader who was not a Jew. So the Antichrist must be a Jew. Would in other words, the argument is, would the Jews receive anyone else who wasn't a Jew? However, the Antichrist does not come initially to set himself up as a Jewish Prime Minister. He comes to sign a peace treaty. You do not need to be a Jew to do that. Okay? Many times people have tried to sign a peace treaty with the nation of Israel. You don't need to be Jewish to do that. Would peace be rejected because the broker was not a Jew? Would this peace treaty be rejected? Oh, but you're not a Jew, so we'll reject this peace treaty. So the arguments for a Jewish is very, very thin and slim. And we'll look at a little bit more in a moment. Revelation 11:8. So all we're doing is looking at some of the references that are being used to prove that the Antichrist is Jewish. So all we're doing is we're going through some scripture verses that people use to prove that the Antichrist is Jewish. So we've used the one in Revelation chapter 7 because the tribe of Dan is not mentioned, so therefore the Antichrist must be from the tribe of Dan. But that's, you've assumed that he's Jewish. And you've also assumed now that he comes from the tribe of Dan. So there's lots of things that they try to force into their viewpoint. So verse 8. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. The seat of the Antichrist will be in Jerusalem. He will seek to rule the world from Jerusalem. right? That great city where the Lord was crucified. And where was the Lord crucified? In Jerusalem. These men here who died are the two witnesses. The two witnesses. The Antichrist has them killed. They die. They lie in the streets. So they're using this because the Antichrist is in Jerusalem. So the argument concludes that the Antichrist must be a Jew because no Gentile could reign from this city. No world ruler could rule the world from Jerusalem and not be Jewish. That's what they're saying. But, as can be seen from this verse, notice this verse again. This city, this great city, which is Jerusalem, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt. Sodom and Egypt. This place is called Sodom and Egypt. So it's not in a good space to be a godly city. A godly city. And the way it's treated, these two witnesses. Also go back to verse 2. It says, but the court which is without the temple, leave out and measure it not. It is given unto the Gentiles. In the holy city shall they tread under foot 40 and 2 months. Who shall tread the city under foot for 42 months? The Gentiles. The Gentiles. So to use this verse in verse 8 to say that the Antichrist must be Jewish because who else would rule the world from the city? Well, the city is not in a good space to be spiritually sound, to be worshipping God, because the city is called Sodom and Egypt. And in verse 2, the city is tread under foot for 40 and 2 months by the Gentiles. So why couldn't a Gentile, when part of the city is being given to the Gentiles, rule the world from there? Doesn't have to be a Jew. He could be just using that part of Jerusalem to rule the world from. So, to me, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Turn to Daniel 9:26. Daniel 9:26. And after 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And then of course in verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. It's a 7-year covenant. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. And so this Antichrist does not have to be a Jew. Just because Jerusalem is mentioned, just because Israel is mentioned, doesn't automatically make him a Jew. Doesn't make him a Jew. The Bible does not explicitly say that the Antichrist will be a Jew. In Revelation 13:1, Revelation 13 verse 1. Oh, look at the time. Maybe 10 to. The clock's slowing down. I think we must need a bring battery. Maybe the Lord's giving them more time. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. The Antichrist, this world empire comes up out of the sea. And so the question is, what is the sea? What is the reference? What does the sea represent? What does the sea represent? If we know that, then we can answer the question. Because here is saw the beast rise up out of the sea, in verse 1. Let's turn over to Revelation 17:15 and see what the definition is of the sea. Verse 15. So remember, in chapter 17 we saw the woman riding the beast, and the woman was the false prophet, and the beast is the Antichrist. Verse 15 says, "And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples, and multitudes, and nations, and tongues." Does that sound like Jews? It sounds like everyone, doesn't it? Includes Gentiles as well as Jewish people. All tongues, and multitudes, and nations, plural, not nation, not Israel, nations. So the Antichrist rises up, or his kingdom rises up out of the nations. Out of the nations. So, verse 15 tells us they are nations. It seems that the Antichrist will be Roman descent, if you want to push it a little bit further, rather than Jewish, but we'll come back to that a little later. Verses 9 through to 12. Verse 9. "And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come." And remember, we looked at that. Starts off at Egypt, Assyria, then the Babylonian Empire, which is under Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold. That's Daniel's prophecy, the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. So the one that has not yet come, the one that is the Roman Empire. And the one that is yet to come follows that. "And he cometh," must continue for a short space, "and the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and of the 7, and goeth into perdition." And verse 12, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast." So the 7 mountains and all those sort of things where the the false prophet is ruling and reigning from is all Rome. So it could be that this man, instead of being Jewish, is actually Roman. Okay? Now, some people believe that he is Greek. We'll look at all that a little later when we come to look at the Antichrist, whether he's a Gentile, and if he's a Gentile, what sort of Gentile is he? I've already been Daniel 9:26, "But the people of the prince that shall come." Now, if we remember back a few weeks, the reformers under the Reformation have pointed that the Roman Catholics have said that the Pope is the Antichrist. Well, we looked at that, and we've come to the conclusion that the Pope isn't the Antichrist, he is the false prophet rather than the Antichrist. But here we see the Martin Luther's thing here that he wrote, that they were accused of this by the reformers beginning at the Reformation, 16th century. Europe, 1571. And Martin Luther and his 95 Theses initiated the Reformation from the Roman Catholic Church. So the accusation is that you could say, okay, the Antichrist, instead of being Jewish, will be from Rome. Okay? And of course, the reaction of the Roman Catholic Church will say, no, the Pope isn't the Antichrist. No, he's not the Antichrist. The Antichrist must be a Jew. And so we have all this issue. The Antichrist will persecute the Jews. The Antichrist will wipe out Jewish laws and traditions and establish his own. Right? The Antichrist will desecrate and leave the temple desolate. It would seem incredulous that the Antichrist would be a Jew. And we're going to examine that. I think we're sort of running out of time to continue with this, but we'll pick this up again because there's one huge point that they forget about the Antichrist and being, whether he's Jewish or not. Huge point. Now, I'm not going to tell you now. You'll have to come back next week. All right, Eva? Okay. We'll leave that there. Fortnight, yes, that's right. Fortnight, because I'm not going to do this next week. Fortnight. So, is he a Jew? The verses we've seen so far that they use to prove that the Antichrist is Jewish are weak. They don't stack up very strong. The Bible is not explicit that the Antichrist is Jewish. It doesn't say explicitly. The verses that they point to them proves that he is Jewish. To me, it's not iron cast. And they've actually forgotten a huge point. A huge point, which I'll mention in a fortnight's time. Okay, if he's not Jewish, then he must be a Gentile, right? There's only Jews or Gentiles. There can only be one other option. Okay, then if he's a Gentile, what sort of Gentile is he? Is he a European? Is he European?